Welcome to the webinar for the discussion guide for Pacific Heartbeat Season 11. My name is Sarah Brissenden Smith. I am a partner with Impact Media Partners, and today we'll walk you through how and when to use the discussion guide for the 11th season of the marquee anthology series Pacific Heartbeat. Provides viewers a glimpse of the real Pacific, so its people, cultures, languages, music, and contemporary issues. I have the great pleasure today of introducing the educational writer for the project, Chi Do. Thank you for joining us, Chi.
Thanks for having me.
In today's brief webinar, we are going to share some tips and some best practices, and we'll take a bit of a deep dive into one of the featured films and the resources that Chi has pulled together for all of us. So I'm going to get us started. And I would love for you to share with us, Chi, just to start, what was your thinking as far as the audiences that you had in mind in creating this guide?
Well, I know public television audiences are so diverse and so unique that I really tried to keep a lot of people in mind, people of all ages, all backgrounds, when I was writing this guide. So in the back of my mind, I was thinking about what kind of conversation would I have with maybe my college age cousin and my mom and my best friend and maybe my neighbor all at the same table. What could we talk about? What kind of questions could we ponder so that each of us from our diverse worldviews and perspectives could relate to each other and also relate to the really incredible stories that are portrayed in Pacific Heartbeat.
That's great. I think that's a wonderful approach. For many of us, we're fortunate that we do have all of that kind of diversity within our own circles. So I'm curious if, thinking about all of those folks and keeping them in mind, what suggestions would you have for folks as to how they might approach this if they're in a classroom setting versus with friends and family or in another community setting?
Yeah, I think for teachers, there's so much to unpack with all these different stories. Even though these take place in a very specific place, I think there's so much that's relatable when I think about all of the heroes that we meet through the Pacific Heartbeat films. So for teachers, I think that there's a lot that can be sparked in terms of exploring the issues even further through research and debate, creative writing, and the arts. While I don't specifically touch on those and provide, lesson plans for those specific areas, you could look at any of the discussion questions and transform that into a prompt for a creative writing assignment, or maybe even a visual arts project. And I think there's a lot you can do to localize or, think about how does this affect me and my community, and trying to research the issues and how they, what they look like in your own backyard or in your own town or even your own state. So for example, you could look at climate change policies in your community in response to high tide, don't hide. And think about, is what my community is doing is enough? Are there new policy recommendations that I want to make based on what I've learned about in this film and some of the links and further explorations that we provide for people to learn more about climate change and the impending crisis that's coming? You might look at cultural and historical landmarks in your town, and look at what kind of hidden stories, what kind of voices have been suppressed or have not been brought to the forefront, and do some research and some writing to present that to your community. So I think there's so much that you can dive into that's inspired by the work of the people that are in the films, as if you're a teacher.
Great. And that's one of the great things I think about Pacific Heartbeat, and what I appreciate every year is that it really does, there's a universality to it, but there's also these very, very distinct stories that I've never heard before, that I always feel like I walk away with like a great appreciation for stories that do go untold in so many of our communities. So I think that's great. So if we think about kind of how people approach this guide, for teachers, it may feel a bit more like what they do every day. And
Right.
for folks that, this may be the first time that they kind of are using a guide like this, or a tool to help them to kind of unpack film. So I'm wondering if you have suggestions for how people should go about familiarizing themselves with the content.
Hmm. Well, in terms of, if I'm thinking about parents, for example, if they want to watch a film with their child, and use a discussion guide as a launching point for um, talking about what comes up for them as they're watching the film, I think that, just the act of sitting down, putting all the distractions aside and surrendering yourself to, the 60 minutes that you'll have with your kid to just get immersed into a story and connect with other people. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for parents to connect, and engage with their children in a way that's not normally possible. So for parents, I would say, just treat this as an opportunity to deepen your connection with your child and learn more about them through a kind of conversation that you can have about, what stands out to you in the films. I would encourage parents, and family members to, follow your curiosity and take it as an opportunity to listen, and to really learn more about your child or your family member that you're watching the film with. So, for example, if there's, something that really stirs you, and makes you angry or makes you feel like that's really unjust and that's really unfair, I want to do something about it. I would say support your child's curiosity, support their desire to take action, and use some of the resources that we link to in the guide to find out more about what's happening in your community, and use it as a launching point to, maybe come across, new resources that might be in your own community that I haven't, been able to find for you. So I just think it's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to connect and even do something together, whether it's having that conversation, or whether it's sparking you to do something, to make an impact around one of these issues in your community.
That's great. And just the intergenerational opportunity that's there, and is actually told in many of the stories, kind of that the importance of that kind of legacy, and being able to have your own family kind of experience that together.
Mhm.
And have
Yeah, and I think that there's so much that we see in these films that's all about, you know, being heard, and being seen. And what better way, to show how important that is by modeling that for, not only your child, but your friends and your family, your neighbors, whomever you might be watching these films and having discussion with. It's just really powerful to be seen and be heard.
Absolutely, absolutely. Especially for those of us that are in communities and from communities that don't kind of make it into those mainstream conversations very often. So,
Right, right.
fantastic opportunity. So I'm curious. I know there was a lot of research that went into kind of creating this resource for folks. So I'm wondering, what resource or organization or call to action did you stumble across in the process of making this that you're really excited to share with people?
Can you ask that question again? I'm not sure I understood it.
Sure, sure. I think, we have, in looking through the guide, there's discussion prompts, and then there's some ways that you can learn more and articles you can read. I saw that there's, the top 8 or 9, people of color working in environmentalism, which I was excited about. So I'm curious for you as the writer, kind of what were you most excited about that you discovered kind of in this process of bringing all these resources together for us?
Yeah, I mean, I would say saying that I'm excited about this is not, perhaps the right, setup, but I was really impacted by, the movie about climate change.
Hmm.
And, I felt like I knew a lot. I've done a lot of work on climate change films in the past, but, it's been a few years, and just the updated research and data that there is, and there's so many resources out there. It was, just really sobering, to read all of the, updated, um, research that's been happening from scientists on just how quickly things are snowballing, and how urgently we need to respond. And so I would say that there's a lot of resources in the guide that help you understand the scope, but also help you to identify, real things that we can do as individuals, but also the kinds of conversations that we need to have with policymakers. And I think for an issue that seems just insurmountable and impossible to turn the tide on, it's important to feel like there are small steps that you can take, but that you have other people out there who are setting examples for you about the language that you can use and the kind of ask that you can make of your local policymakers, your statewide policymakers, your, at the national legislative level. So that to me is heartening, just seeing how many resources are out there. So that no matter where you're starting, I think you'll be able to find a way to feel like I can do something, and there are ways for me to, take incremental action as you wrap your arms around the problem. So saying I'm excited about it seems like the wrong way to put it, but I'm glad to see that there's so many. Yeah. I mean, I'm glad to see that there are so many organizations and so many people out there who are working on this issue, that it gives me hope. So I would say that I'm filled with hope seeing the work that's being done.
Great. And to know that so many of the organizations and the folks that are stepping forward as leaders are young people, which I think is also extremely heartening, that they're just taking and running with it. So
yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's why I wanted to include some of those links about, some of the unsung heroes, especially young people of color, who are leading the charge around issues that are in their own backyards or even at a global level. Because I think there has been some, criticism of, people who get put at the spotlight, like Greta Thunberg, and that taking away from, the people who, like many indigenous cultures, who are really living with the fallout of what's happening, and are at the front lines of fighting for change, but are also at ground zero in terms of the immediate impact, like we see in Philly, in that film. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. So I think that kind of naturally leads us into our last kind of big piece here, which is a bit of a deep dive. So we've kind of alluded to some of the exercises related to the 4 films in this series this season. And I'm curious if there's one in particular that stands out that you'd like to kind of walk us through the resource and kind of what's available for us to dig into.
Yeah. Well, a lot of my work in the past has been about, getting people to, after they've watched a film, actually, do something, whether it's talking to a bunch of your friends about the issues and what you've learned, or, engaging in a project. And so one of the activities that I'm really excited about from the discussion guide is encouraging people to gather some friends or some classmates or some community members around to do it's called Inside Out, and it's a participatory project, photography project that centers around a specific theme. And you would take portraits of people in your community and ask them, interview them about a specific topic or issue. So I wrote this particular activity with James and Icy in mind. And so in this case, you might focus on the unseen elderly or aging population in your community. And you might try and find a senior center or a community center where seniors gather, and invite them to participate in the project, interview them about their lives, what their accomplishments have been, what their worries and their hopes are. I mean, there's so many ways that you could, go with the conversation. But what I love about this project is it's what we were talking about earlier. It's about being seen and being heard. And in this case, when you take these photographs, part of the project is blowing them up into large scale prints, and then with permission, finding a public space where you can wheat paste them. So it starts a conversation beyond your particular group, but it brings the conversation out into your community. And if you decide that you want to document your process and even post some of those portraits online, then you have a chance to engage a broader audience, even a global audience, in the conversation. And it's inspired by a French artist named JR, and he has this whole organization called Inside Out that invites people to become action leaders and produce these projects in their communities. And they actually help you if you decide you want to participate in the at the global level. You can send them your photos and your action, and if they approve it, they'll send back the large scale prints to you so that you can post them up in your community. And because it's a global project, you would have the eyes and ears of a really international community to be a part of the conversation. And I've seen some really, just incredibly that have happened, that have connected different generations in conversation. But what I like about the Inside Out project is that you could apply this to any of the films and any of the issues that are covered in the Pacific Heartbeat series. So while it's paired with James and Icy, you could easily, adapt the project for climate change or, the sexual violence epidemic, or any of the issues that are covered in the films. So it's a flexible, fun, and an inspiring project that I think is really cool.
Fantastic. It sounds exciting. As soon as you said photography, I was excited. And at this point, all of us are, we all have our cameras in our hands at all times,
Right.
Our phones, right? So this is
you can take incredible portraits with your smartphones.
Okay.
And again, it's what's incredible about film is, the visual and the kind of connection that you can feel with someone who's talking to you, who might look like you, or represent things that you're experiencing in your life, and you're seeing that reflected back at you on screen. And then there's something really powerful about seeing a huge image of people and faces that are in your community that you never would have had a chance to meet them or know them otherwise. So again, it's about being seen and being heard, and giving an opportunity for voices to come out to the forefront that usually don't have that chance.
Well, I'm excited. That's not an exercise that I had seen before. So it's nice to always, when you do this work, it's always nice to have a bit of new inspiration. So I imagine that will be the case for many of the folks that have come to this webinar in search of a bit of inspiration. So
I hope so.
Are there any other tips that you think you want to make sure that people are kind of aware of as they're encountering the guide?
I would say don't treat the guide as the only resource, that what's there is it. I would say follow your curiosity. For me, I probably spent a lot more time than I intended to researching, because it's so easy to go down a rabbit hole, and not in a negative sense. I mean, there's just so many fascinating threads that you can follow that are related to the specific area that you're researching. And I think it's a wonderful thing to give your curiosity space to bloom, so that you'll just end up being more enriched and smarter and more aware. And if you can share that with other people, then I think that's a good thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that takes us out on a really high note. So thank you so much, Chi, for sharing your insights with us today about the guide for season 11. Can you believe it? It's been season 11. That's amazing. Of Pacific Heartbeat. And walking us through this season's 4 new films. So we really appreciate your time. And I can speak for myself when I say I'm excited to dig into all of these things. And I hope for everyone that joined us today, they're also excited to explore all of these stories and bring them out into their respective communities. So thanks so much.
Thank you. It was an honor. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you being here.